Epicells, you are so back right now because they've only gone and done it. The Epiphone open book headstock. You could probably say I've got some hot takes on headstocks. For example, I think the best looking headstock on a Les Paul body shape is a reverse pointed Jackson-like headstock. I just think it looks cool. You probably don't, but I think we could all agree that a nice looking headstock on Les Paul is the classic. It's the traditional 3 on a side open book headstock. And maybe it's just familiarity with that being the most common on a Gibson Les Paul, but it seems to be the thing that everybody likes to see. And Gibson know that. They've been very protective of it. Gibson have the trademark on the open book headstock design, which means that if any other brands try and use it, like how Ibanez tried to in the 1970s, well, they're gonna get a letter from Gibson's legal team telling them no. And that works most of the time, although it does depend on which brand you're dealing with and where they're based geographically. For example, Bernie guitars were sued by Gibson for using the open book headstock among other trademarks, and Bernie won in Japan. They can legally produce those guitars now. But in the vast majority of cases, Gibson were successful in defending their trademark and keeping it exclusive to Gibson. No other brands were really able to use it, and that included Gibson's own sub-brand, Epiphone. For many years, if you bought an Epiphone Les Paul, you were, I suppose, compromising, because they were cheaper guitars than the Gibsons, and what reminded you of that was always the headstock. It was, let's be frank, never as visually appealing. For a long time you had a weird tombstone-esque looking one, and then just recently enough in the last couple of years, they've pivoted back to the original Epiphone headstock design, which is a little bit blocky, but it's much better looking than the tombstone, at least in person. But everything has changed as of today, because it was just announced that Kirk Hammett is getting a signature Epiphone Les Paul, and it's got the open book headstock. That guitar looks how it should do now. It looks good. There's no physical indication that it's an Epiphone from, a few feet away, other than the logo, which, again, at this distance, you could see it as a Gibson. It's at the same angle. It just looks so much better. Gibson recently enough appointed a new CEO, and that CEO is a guitar player, so maybe that has something to do with it. Because I think this is an upgrade that all guitar players can kind of get behind. That looks so much better. On the close-up, I don't know if it's the angle or not, one side kind of looks a little less pointed than the other, the side on the right, but I think it might be the angle, because on the back it looks normal. But that looks like a Gibson headstock, which is so much cooler. But this isn't exactly the first time that an Epiphone has had an open book headstock design. If you go back to the late 90s and early 2000s, Epiphone released a Made in Japan Elite series. And if you bought one of these almost anywhere in the world, your headstock would be, well, let's be frank, goofy looking. It's a boat anchor of a headstock that just is not proportional at all to the body. It just looks so out of place. If we get a close-up of it, that cheapens the whole thing. However, those were the guitars that were made in Japan and exported to everywhere else in the world. But the Epiphone Elites that were made in Japan had a very different headstock. So here we have one. It looks quite nice, and there you have it. An open book headstock with an Epiphone logo. This is an Epiphone with an open book headstock, and it was only made for the Japanese market. That's why this Kirk Hammett signature is such a big deal, because that's worldwide. You can buy it anywhere. It's not specifically for the Japanese market, where the laws and trademarks surrounding the open book are different to the rest of the world. This is everywhere. But to be fair, I think they may have had to do this, at least on this model, because it's not exactly cheap. It's €1,700, and, well, Epiphone, when people think of Epiphone, for many years has been the beginner brand. Now, they're not so much that anymore. They've been stepping up over the last few years, but they need to change that feeling in people's minds. When they see Epiphone, they think the beginner guitars. And maybe the best way to do that is with the headstock shape, because you can get an entry-level Gibson guitar with Gibson on the headstock, and the open book headstock for that matter, for around the same price, if not less, than this brand new Epiphone. Epiphone have been upping their game and their price recently. You've got the Dave Mustaine signature, which is €1,800. That's a lot. And maybe it's going to take something like this headstock change to convince people that Epiphone are a little bit higher in the pecking order than where they may have thought. And the Kirk Hammett Sig does have some nice specs. You've got Gibson pickups and you've got Grover tuners as well. So it is an upgrade. It's not your standard Epiphone that you may think. Now, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any indication that this is going to be a change across the Epiphone range. Certainly not a change overnight. But I think I speak for most people when I say it would be very cool if they did. So anyway, that's just a quick video. Comment below if you'd like to see the rest of the Epiphone range with this headstock. I know I certainly would. And subscribe if you want to. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.